Hello and welcome to this video in which we will see a couple examples of opposition in practice in endgames. In this first position, it's black to move, and in fact, black is completely lost in this position. Black's king right now is doing a very good job of blocking out the white king in that it's stopping white from advancing to any of the three circled squares, which is where white would like to move their king in order to progress. The problem for black is that the only square that this is possible for them to achieve is exactly where their king is right now. So if they move their king anywhere, they will allow white to move to one of those three squares and start to make progress. This sort of situation is what we refer to as zugswang. If black was allowed to pass, black would be completely fine. However, they're not allowed to pass, and so they are actually lost. Let's see how this might play out. Black moves their king to this side. Then it would be similar if they moved to the other side, more or less a mirror of what we're going to see. And now this means that black has abandoned one of those three squares, so white is able to progress with their king to the other side. This is referred to as outflanking, and white is outflanking black. And now, in addition to the fact that white is already ready to go gobble up all these pawns, it's actually even more problematic for black because they can't even start to try to gobble up white's pawns because white is blocking their king out of the position. So they kind of just have to twiddle their thumbs for a little bit while we go and try to take their pawn. They're still blocked out from making progress. Take, and we can see that we are going to have a little bit of a race to see who promotes first, but white is going to be so much faster to promote their pawn, and so white will win this game. So if we go back to the original position, this was a position where the kings were in opposition. We would say that white has the opposition because it's black's turn, and black is in zugzwang because they don't have any move that they can make. Now what if we had this exact same position, except instead of it being black's turn, it's white's turn? Well, now it turns out that this position is a draw, although white has to be a little bit careful about what move they make. White is in zugzwang in the same sense because white would be happy to pass the move to black. However, the same way, they cannot do it. And the most natural move for white, if you just were playing really quickly, would be to think, oh, I'm going to keep my king in the center and I'm going to move my king there. This would in fact be a terrible mistake. Black can win the game now by moving their king forward. And now we have actually a mirror of what we just saw a moment ago, where now white is in zugzwang because white will have to pick a side that their king will move to. Black will then invade on the other side, and black will gobble up the pawns on that side of the board. There'll be a little bit of a pawn race. You could calculate and count how many different turns it will take for each side to make a queen, but the side that is invading first is going to be much faster in this case. So this means we cannot step back. This would be a bad move. What we can do though is we can step back to here. It also would be the same if we had stepped back to the other square. Now, the key idea is that black, in order to try to progress, will eventually have to move their king forward. And now we have the important move that we move our king to the side. We take the opposition. So now it's black's turn when we're in opposition this way. And now actually we have an exact mirror of the position that we had a moment ago, that black has the same exact decision. If they were to move their king back here, this would be a terrible mistake because white progresses their king forward, takes the opposition, and will win the game. Black similarly has to do the same trick where they step their king to the side so that they're able to match us coming forward with taking the opposition. Now, an interesting thing to maybe notice about this specific endgame is that if one side has the opposition and their king is already on the fourth row from their perspective, then they'll win the game. Here we see that if this position was black to move, white would win because black would have to cede to one side and white would go to the other side. So if it's on the fourth rank and you have the opposition, then you're winning. However, if your own king is only on the third rank and you have the opposition, then it's actually a draw. It's still good to have the opposition in that case, but you're only able to make a draw out of that. When I say third rank, I'm meaning from their perspective. So here we're considering that the black king, even though it's on the number 6 rank officially, from their own perspective, if they're on their third rank, it ends up with a draw out of that. This next position is meant to illustrate the concept that opposition by itself is not always worth anything. What you have to be able to do is combine opposition with the idea of sidestepping with your king in the opposite direction from where the opposing king went. So here we have a position and it's black to move. And in fact, the position is a draw, but it can only be a draw in one very specific move. We're going to start with the moves that are wrong. We'll see what happens in those cases, and then we'll see what the right move is. Often this is the way to make a good move is you look at all the options that you have, you rule out every single one except for one, and then by process of elimination, that turns out to be the correct move. So we'll start by retreating our king. This move is a losing move, but white has to make the correct move in response, which is they step forward. They, in this case, will take the opposition. Now, if it's black's turn, they have this bad choice that they somehow have to cede some ground. Once they cede ground, white will go in the opposite direction. And if black chooses to go backwards, white will come in and actually the pawns cannot be defended anymore. If black chooses to go to the side, then white will go to the other side. And we'll see this process repeat itself. Black goes here, white goes here, and now black has another bad choice where they have to cede some ground. If they go this way, then white will simply come in and take the pawn. But if they go to this side to kind of try to stay closer to their pawn, the problem is that white will be able to come in and more or less continually push black back further and further. Again, black has to move. Let's say that they go here. White now attacks the pawn. Black has only one way to defend the pawn. They move it here. White comes up. And now again, black is in zugswang because black cannot move their king to any square that doesn't allow white to take the pawn. They move their king, we take the pawn, and white is essentially going to repeat this process over and over again until they've taken all the 3 pawns, and then they can make a queen. So we see that once we get to this position, with it being black's turn, white will win the game. So when black moves, so this is what is the problem with moving straight back. If we move here, this is a bad move, but white has to be correct in their choice of moves. If they were to move their king forward, this would allow black to take the opposition and draw the game. Black would step over with their king, and they would make a draw because there's nothing that white can do anymore. And white is now the one in zugswang. White could, for example, move their king over here, and black would now just match what the white king has done. Here, here, we go more or less back and forth. So this would not be them getting anywhere. However, if black moves their king here, the way for white to win is again by taking the opposition. They move their king to be in opposition with their opponent's king with exactly 1 square separating the 2 kings, and now black is in zugswang. Now they can move their king to the side. We go here. This is the position that we've already reached. If on the initial move, if black chooses to go this way, now white can't take the vertical opposition because the pawn is blocking its path. However, it can take what's known as the diagonal opposition. So here we have the kings similarly exactly 1 square apart, but they're separated diagonally. And this can often be as effective as the vertical or horizontal opposition. And in fact, here it is because black has only one way to stop white from making progress with their king to the e5 square, and that's to move their king here. That will lead to white moving their king over, taking the opposition again, and we saw this position before. This was a case where black is in zugswang. So we've ruled out all of these moves. The only move that's left for black, only legal move, is to move their king here. And in fact, this is enough to draw the game. White would like to be able to go the opposite way of what black just did. That's the idea of taking the opposition, is that one side goes one way, we go the other way. However, in this specific position, it's not possible to do that because the black pawn is blocking the route of the king to be able to go the other way. So white could continue, take the opposition again, and if black were to, for example, move their king this way, now white would be able to come in with their king and go in and take all the pawns. And this is again the idea that black goes one way, we go the other way. So if black goes to the right, we go to the left. However, in this position, black can in fact go to the left successfully because our idea would be that we'd want to move to the right to go to the opposite side, but this would be a horrible mistake because now we've just abandoned all of our pawns, and so we've sort of overthought the situation a little bit, and then now black just comes in and takes all our pawns, and black will win the game. So that means that white would in fact not be allowed to, or not be able to go to the opposite side. They would be forced to come back and we'd have a draw. So interestingly, in this position, it's similar to the last position as well, that if the two kings are in opposition to each other and the white king is on the third rank and the black king is on the fifth rank, having the opposition is not actually enough for white to win because they don't have the ability to go the opposite way of black. However, if they have the opposition on the fourth rank, then in that case, they can always take the opposite approach of going in a different direction of where black is going towards. In this final position, we're going to see the value of having a reserve tempo with one of your pawns as a way to effectively pass the move to your opponent in the sense that you can make a move that won't change the important aspects of the position. So I have added to the previous position some pawns on the king side, which will in fact change this position quite a big deal. Without these pawns, we could imagine that the kings will do some sort of race to the middle, but they'll be a little bit careful at the point when they are getting closer to each other to make sure that they pick the correct square to try to take the opposition from each other. So what I mean by this is once the kings get a little bit towards the middle, they will be slightly careful here to, for example, white wouldn't just want to step up here because black immediately takes the opposition. So sometimes the kings will do a little bit of a dance almost to kind of try to take the opposition at the right time. White to play here has a much simpler way to win the game, and in fact it's the only way that they can win the game. It's making the move pawn to g4. This move is not necessarily the most intuitive, but what it does is it gives us the ability to, at a later on time, when we're in zugswang, zugswang could be in air quotes there because it won't actually be zugswang because of this pawn, it will allow us to move this pawn up one square, which won't change the state of the kings, but will change the fact that it will no longer be our move. So let's see how this kind of thing could transpire. So black to move, moves their king forward, and we move our king forward. And now if black were to move their king up, and we could immediately take the opposition, but normally this would have been fine. If this pawn was on h3, this would still be a draw. What black would do, very similarly to the position we saw before, is black would just be careful to move their king to f6 or d6. The care is to avoid moving their king to e6. Once they move their king back to f6, we could come forward with our king and they would be able to take the opposition. And this position would have been a draw. However, white is in zugswang, but they are able to essentially pass the move to their opponent now by moving their pawn forward. So this doesn't change the state of the kings, but they have passed the move because this pawn was very relevant to the position because they had this extra move or this extra tempo that they could pass this way, but it's not changing the state of the kings in terms of the opposition. So now it's black's turn. Black is in zugzwang. If they had a pawn, let's say on a7, they could do the same trick and pass the move to their opponent. However, they don't, and so they would be completely lost because in this position, whichever way they move their king, we're going to go the opposite way. Thank you for watching this video. Hopefully it helped to clarify some of the concepts we saw, such as opposition, zugzwang, and also reserve tempi. If you have any questions about any of the positions that we saw, feel free to ask in the comments. If you like this video, please give a thumbs up or subscribe. In any case, I will see you next time. Bye.